I always believed betrayal was something that happened to other families, not mine. But one night, one secret shattered everything we thought we knew, and nothing was ever the same again. My name's Jake Miller, just a regular guy with simple dreams. All I ever wanted was a peaceful life. A loving wife, a couple of kids running around, and a cozy little home somewhere in Colorado. Right now, I drive an old Ford F-150, a precious gift from my late father. He handed it down to me about 10 years ago, even though by then, that truck was already pushing 15 years old. Dad was a hard-working man, a carpenter and a farmer, and my mom cleaned rooms at the old Route 66 hotel sitting on the edge of Bells, Tennessee. It's a funny little town, Bells. Growing up there gave me a real taste of small-town living, the kind you only hear about in old country songs. Bells was so tiny that when you rolled past the Welcome to Bells sign, you could already read the thanks for visiting message on the back. I went to school there too, elementary, middle, and high school, all tucked into the same worn-down building that also housed the only real store in town, the Bells Mini Market. Folks around town knew me as JM, short for Jake Miller. I wasn't exactly a tough kid, but lucky for me my sister Samantha had my back. She ran in circles with a local troublemaker, not the kind you wanted to cross, which meant nobody dared mess with her little brother. All I ever really wanted was to keep things simple. School wasn't half bad. I had a tight group of friends, a girl I was sweet on, and a beat-up car that somehow kept running, though I probably should have put a little more work into it. But my real passion? Hunting. Ever since I could stumble around on 2 feet, I had this pull toward the woods. My first gun was a little toy pistol with a cork tied on the end, but even back then something about it felt right in my hands. So when an army recruiter showed up one day, a rare sight in our forgotten corner of Tennessee, something clicked deep inside me. I just knew. This was my shot at chasing a real dream, becoming an Army Ranger. Dad wasn't exactly jumping for joy over my decision, but he understood. He knew that sometimes a man's gotta carve his own path. So, after tossing my graduation cap in the air, I didn't waste any time. I enlisted and found myself stationed down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a place that quickly became both my boot camp and, oddly enough, a second home. Now, first impressions? They weren't great. When I lined up in front of the sergeant for the first time, he took one look at me and barked, "Get back on the bus, kid, and go home." Guess he figured Ranger School was no place for scrawny boys who barely cracked 5 feet 7 inches. I didn't let it get under my skin though. Being underestimated wasn't exactly new for me. And sure enough, that first night out in the field turned everything around. At about 3 in the morning during one of our first training exercises, I spotted movement out in the dark woods. Turns out it was the sergeant himself sneaking around to test us. Without a second thought, I leveled my M60 straight at him, textbook perfect, and that was the moment he realized I wasn't just some kid playing soldier. After that, he didn't doubt me again. I ended up surpassing everyone's expectations, even my own. I wound up graduating at the very top of my Ranger class. Honestly, I don't think I'd ever felt prouder in my life. Knowing how much it meant to my mom and dad, seeing the pride shining in their eyes, it made every moment of sweat and struggle worth it. As my time in the Army started winding down, I found myself facing a lot of complicated feelings. Some tough missions stuck with me more than I cared to admit. But, like a lot of guys, I kept those thoughts bottled up tight. I figured carrying it alone was better than laying my burdens on someone else's shoulders. During those last months of service, I started using my spare time to work toward something new, an accounting degree. That's how I crossed paths with Brianna. She was one of those women you notice instantly when she walks into a room, long golden blonde hair and these warm hazel eyes that could stop you in your tracks if you weren't careful. And believe me, she knew exactly the effect she had on people. Brianna wasn't the type to settle. She got all kinds of attention, offers flying her way left and right. But she wasn't swayed easily. She had her own set of rules when it came to choosing a man. He had to be calm, steady, and most importantly, someone she could gently steer when needed. From the first moment she laid eyes on me, Brianna must have seen that I fit her idea of the perfect match. Problem was, I knew deep down she was way out of my league and I acted like it too. Anytime she'd flash that bright, easy smile at me, I'd find a reason to look away. If she tried to strike up a conversation, I'd find a reason to excuse myself. I guess part of me was scared to hope. Then one Sunday everything changed. I was sitting quietly in the small chapel on base, lost in my own thoughts, when I caught a glimpse of her sliding into the bench right behind me. Before she could say a word, I turned around and asked, "Can I help you?" catching her completely off guard. Her face lit up in surprise, but it quickly melted into the kind of warm, genuine smile that could tear down a man's defenses in seconds. And just like that, our story started, a quiet beginning that turned into something real fast. From that moment on, Brianna and I were thick as thieves, inseparable. Wherever I went, she was there, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. When I finally brought her home to meet my family, they fell in love with her charm just as quickly as I had. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the way she carried herself, her ambition. She had earned her MBA and even placed first in her university class. She had this spark in her that you just couldn't fake. My old man, though, he pulled me aside later that night. He gave me one of those rare, serious talks. "Son," he said, "you've got a good woman there, no doubt. But don't lose yourself trying to keep her happy all the time. Find the balance. Give but don't give everything. Sometimes you're gonna need to stand your ground." I listened. I really did. I made a quiet promise that night, a promise I planned to keep no matter what. I wouldn't lose myself no matter how much I loved her. Life seemed to speed up after that. Before I knew it, a whole decade had flown by. I was running my own small but successful auditing business, and Brianna had carved out a solid career for herself too, working as a mid-level sales manager at one of the biggest supermarkets in town. We didn't have kids, not yet anyway. Life just kept us busy enough without little ones underfoot. But we always figured someday when the time was right, we'd grow our family. Looking back now, maybe that's where the cracks started forming. One evening as we were driving home, my phone started buzzing, vibrating so hard it practically rattled the dashboard. I glanced down at the caller ID and felt a strange little knot tighten in my gut. Something told me that phone call was about to change everything. When I glanced down and saw that it was Brianna's name lighting up my phone, a flood of emotions rushed over me, anger, sadness, confusion, all tangled up together. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then decided I didn't want anything to do with it. I let the phone keep buzzing until it finally stopped on its own. But even after the ringing ended, the anger inside me just kept building. In a sudden burst of frustration, I rolled down the window and hurled the phone out onto the side of the road, watching it bounce and disappear into the night. For a moment, I felt lighter, like maybe I could leave everything that was bothering me right there on the asphalt. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my modest little apartment, my mind was a mess. No matter how much I wanted to leave it behind, the chaos kept swirling around in my head. Memories, doubts, fears, all of it crashing together in an endless storm. Meanwhile, across town at a fancy company dinner, Brianna was having her own moment of crisis. She had been handed an envelope right in the middle of the meal, bold as you please in front of everybody, and her face turned the color of a ripe tomato. Embarrassed and furious, she snatched the envelope from the table and bolted to the ladies' room, heart pounding with humiliation. It wasn't just the fact that she'd been called out. It was the audacity of it. The timing. The way it was thrown at her like some kind of public spectacle. She could barely hold back tears as she rushed into the restroom, locking the door behind her. Thankfully for her, Don, one of her colleagues, had stepped in and smoothed things over. He quickly explained to the vice president that the situation was simply an insurance matter. Nothing scandalous, nothing for anyone to whisper about. Brianna owed him big time for that save. Back on the business front, Carrie and I had just finalized a deal worth a staggering $35 million. It had taken months of negotiation, countless hours of work, and more than a few sleepless nights, but we had done it. And we had agreed, quietly between the two of us, that we'd split the profits evenly. That wasn't the only win either. Nissan signed off on a 6-year consulting contract with Carrie once the land deal wrapped up. It felt like the reward we had earned after all the grinding. Later that evening, during a quieter moment, the vice president pulled me aside. He asked, "What are your plans now that the business has been sold?" Truthfully, I hadn't given it much thought. Everything had been moving so fast, I was still catching my breath. I told him just that I hadn't mapped out my next steps yet. He nodded and told me something that stuck in my mind. Part of Nissan's process is running deep background checks. We dig pretty thoroughly. That comment sat heavy with me even after the conversation moved on. Later, Henry, a senior executive, gave me more details. He tasked me with evaluating the newly acquired business, digging deep into the staffing situation and especially the company's bloated payroll. When I got back to my office, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, poring over spreadsheets, contracts, employee records, everything. After several long nights, I pulled together a full report with detailed recommendations. The conclusion was pretty brutal, but it was clear. If we wanted to stop the financial bleeding, we had to cut 25% of the middle management staff. Not just shaving off the bottom, real, painful cuts at the heart of the operation. When I presented my findings, Henry listened carefully. Afterward, he stood up and said calmly, The HR department will start arranging individual meetings with all managers. We'll figure out who stays and who goes. We were told that the interviews would be scheduled soon and that the venue would be announced in advance. People tried to stay professional, but you could feel the tension buzzing through the halls like static electricity. As we left the conference room, Brianna tried to get my attention, maybe to say something, maybe to smooth things over, but I acted like I didn't even see her. I stayed deep in conversation with Henry, pretending she wasn't even there. Meanwhile, Don, ever the diplomat, turned and tried to comfort Brianna. Down the hall, laughter and chatter floated through the air. Some of the employees, the ones who knew they were leaving, were already celebrating like it was a holiday. After all, a lot of them were getting big severance packages, and some were just relieved the uncertainty was finally over. The warm, smoky scent of barbecue drifted in from somewhere nearby, mixing with the laughter and giving the whole place an odd, festive feel. Across the room, Brianna and Don spotted Henry standing by himself, and without wasting a second, they made their way toward him. At the company gathering that afternoon, Brianna couldn't help but comment with a bright smile, "Sir, your home is absolutely stunning." Henry simply nodded, offering a polite smile, but honestly the damage had already been done for both Brianna and Don. Word had gotten around fast about everything that had happened behind the scenes. When the list of layoffs was finally posted, both of their names were right there, clear as day. That night, as the dust settled, life took a sharp turn for a lot of us. Pam, one of the office assistants who had always dreamed of being a mom, finally had her wish come true. She gave birth to beautiful twin girls. And not long after, Carrie and I welcomed a son into the world, a boy who was the spitting image of me. Those early years were busy and chaotic in the best kind of way. Meanwhile, Don and Brianna's marriage fell apart fast. Within a year of the layoffs, they were separated and before long officially divorced. One night, Don had a few buddies from work over, not realizing that Brianna, who had stopped by to pick up some of her things, was within earshot. She overheard him telling stories about when they had first met, only he wasn't exactly painting her in a flattering light. His words were cruel, mocking. The next morning she packed up the last of her belongings and never looked back. Life kept marching forward. At the same time, my younger sister Jennifer was chasing her own dreams. She had big ambitions of making it in Hollywood. Acting had always been her passion. I couldn't lie, I was proud of her, but there was also this knot of worry deep in my gut. It felt strange, realizing we were both about to head down completely different roads. While she bounced between auditions across the country, I buried myself in law textbooks, determined to carve out a stable life. Funny enough, even though Jennifer was 2 years older than me, I graduated first. She had fallen behind a grade back in high school, and even now she never liked to talk about it much. After graduation, Carrie and I took another big step. We bought our first real home together, a cozy place in Virginia. The price was steep, no doubt about it, but between my stable job and a solid credit score, we managed to land a mortgage that fit our budget. Things were finally looking up, until everything came crashing down. The CEO of the company I worked for was caught red-handed in an embezzlement scandal. Practically overnight, the whole firm collapsed, and with it, my job disappeared into thin air. Worse still, we had mounting debts, and if we couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments, we stood to lose the home we'd worked so hard for. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table, holding Carrie's hands as we both cried, feeling the weight of it all crashing down around us. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Sometimes silence carries the heaviest truths. Even after that, something kept gnawing at me, something that went beyond money problems. Carrie's new job paid most of the bills, and while I was grateful, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there were things she wasn't telling me. It didn't seem unreasonable to want a little transparency, especially when her career was now holding our entire house together. But every time the doubts crept up, I shoved them back down. Told myself it was paranoia. Told myself I had bigger things to worry about, like rebuilding my career and keeping our family together. Still, that uneasy feeling never left. For the longest time, I resisted digging deeper. I didn't want to be that guy, the one snooping through phones or imagining the worst. And besides, if I was wrong, I'd only hurt Carrie and damage the fragile trust we had left. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in the dark forever. Hiring a private investigator wasn't something I took lightly. We could barely afford groceries some weeks, let alone a professional. But I found a guy who worked cheap, rough around the edges but thorough. He promised he wouldn't stop until he found the truth, even if it meant getting his hands a little dirty. One day later, a thick envelope landed on my desk. Inside it, a detailed report, and dozens of high-resolution photographs that shattered every last piece of hope I'd been clinging to. There it was. In black and white. No excuses. No explanations needed. I sat there, just staring, heart pounding, as I flipped through photo after photo, waiting, almost daring, for my mind to find some way to deny what my eyes were seeing. And then, finally, I heard the soft footsteps behind me. Carrie had come into the room, and now she stood frozen in place, her eyes scanning every image laid out in front of me. As Carrie stood there in the doorway, her face slowly drained of all color. I didn't need any more proof. I could feel the guilt radiating off her like the heat from an oven, overwhelming and unmistakable. In that instant, any tiny doubts I had about the photos vanished. To my surprise, Carrie didn't try to lie. She didn't rush to explain things away or scramble for excuses. She just broke right there in front of me, dropping to her knees, sobbing so hard it was like all the weight she'd been carrying finally crushed her. Through her tears, she confessed the truth. Her involvement in that club, the one I had learned about, had started out of a desperate attempt to save what little was left of our crumbling marriage. She said she had felt so helpless, so lost, and thought that somehow, some way, it might fix the distance that had crept between us. Hearing her say that, it made my whole life feel like a sick joke. A cruel twist of fate I never saw coming. After a long stretch of heavy silence between us, Carrie lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, and begged for another chance. She swore she would leave that life behind, said she'd quit the club the very next day, no questions asked. I wish I could tell you I was strong in that moment. That I stood tall and coldly asked her to leave, shutting the door on the whole mess forever. But the truth is, I struggled. I wrestled with it, hard. One part of me screamed to send her packing, to stand up for myself and never look back. It would have been the right thing to do, no doubt. And yet, there I was, paralyzed. Torn between the hurt, the betrayal, and the memory of the life we had built together. When the dust finally settled, I made a choice. I chose to trust her, one last time. I know plenty of people would say I was a fool for it. Maybe they're right. But I believed that redemption was real. That people could stumble and still find their way back if someone was willing to believe in them. For a while, it looked like things might actually work out. We started picking up the pieces, slowly, one fragile moment at a time. But of course, life has a way of throwing a wrench into your plans just when you think you're finally getting steady again. Murphy's Law, right? It came crashing down again when Nancy, an old acquaintance of Carrie's, found me one evening. She was nervous, fidgeting with the strap of her purse, and after some awkward small talk, she blurted out that she had something I needed to see. Curiosity prickled at the back of my neck. I couldn't help but ask how she ended up with such damning photos in the first place. Nancy sighed, heavy with old memories. We used to work together at the same club, she said, her voice quieter now. I worked there for about 3 years before Carrie showed up. We used to take our breaks together, talk about everything. At least, I thought we did. I had no idea she was married back then. She paused, staring down at her hands. Then she told me about the night she found out. How hurt she felt, betrayed by a friend she thought she knew. So she made a choice. She left an envelope with evidence tucked discreetly in my booth at the club, hoping it might be the nudge needed to bring everything into the open. As Nancy talked, memories crashed through my mind. Memories of the night I had caught Carrie in that club, of the look on her face when she saw me there. The truth hit me like a bolt of lightning. Carrie might have said she changed, but deep down she had already chosen to live for herself long before that night. And suddenly, all the moments I had doubted my gut, all the times I had told myself to stop being paranoid, they came roaring back with a vengeance. I couldn't help but feel that deep, bitter regret. I should have trusted my instincts all along. I sat there in silence, furious with myself. I scolded myself over and over again, for being weak, for brushing off my gut instincts and letting self-doubt get the better of me. All those nights I told myself to trust her, I had been lying to my own heart. Across from me, Nancy must have sensed my spiraling thoughts. She stayed quiet, patient, giving me the space to process what I was finally, painfully accepting. It felt like time dragged its feet after that. Every minute ticked by like an hour as I waited for the day that would put an end to my wife's lies, the day of the divorce hearing. When it finally came, I picked Nancy up early and we made our way to the courthouse in Virginia together. Walking through those heavy wooden doors, I felt the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. But I kept my focus. I made sure Nancy found an empty seat near the back, blending in with the crowd. She wasn't just there for moral support, she was my ace in the hole. Following the strategy we'd mapped out, I kept her presence hidden until it was time for her testimony. If my wife had any ideas about trying to spin the story, we would have something far stronger than words, hard evidence. As we sat there waiting for the judge, I couldn't help but notice Carrie fidgeting across the room, dressed in a polished suit, trying to put on the same polished act she always did. Watching her, memories flooded back. The good, the bad, the thousand moments where I had been blind. And then, as I studied her, something clicked in my mind. All those years ago when she dropped out of school? She had always been so vague about it. Said she needed time to figure things out. It hit me like a freight train right there in that courtroom. She had been hiding a pregnancy. Another secret, buried so deep I had never thought to question it. The realization shattered something inside me. We had built a life that was supposed to be built on honesty, transparency, trust. And here I was, realizing I didn't even know who I had married. When it was finally Nancy's turn to testify, the courtroom tensed. She took the stand calmly, her voice steady as she laid out the evidence. Photographs, testimony, everything. She walked the court through every detail. How Carrie had been working at an exclusive club for thrill seekers, dressed to the nines in flashy outfits and glittering jewelry, barely a week before the hearing. As the photos were passed around, projected up on the screen, you could feel the mood in the room shift. My wife's face went ghost pale. The photos left no room for lies, no cracks to squeeze through. Even her own lawyer stumbled for a moment, thrown off balance by the undeniable truth flashing on the screen. I watched Carrie's family seated behind her stiffen in their chairs, their expressions shifting from support to shock and finally to disgust. The web of lies she had spun for years, the carefully built image she had worn like armor, collapsed in front of everyone. When the sides finished presenting their arguments, the judge spoke. If either party would like to make a final statement, he said, now is the time. I braced myself. I expected Carrie to explode, to shout, to cry, to find some way to spin this one last time. But instead, she sat there, burying her face in her hands, shaking with silent sobs. She had nothing left to say. The courtroom sat in heavy, loaded silence. Carrie's own family wouldn't meet her eyes. Even her lawyer, who had fought hard for her earlier, looked away as if he couldn't stomach what he was representing anymore. And just like that, the marriage I had believed in, the love I thought was unbreakable, ended not with a fight but with a quiet, shattering silence. For the sake of privacy, I want to make it clear. This isn't about me or my husband. We've been lucky enough to share a happy, solid marriage for 14 wonderful years. No, this story belongs to my parents. My mom, a lively and spirited woman of 59, and my dad, a wise, steady man of 63. They had built a life together that, to anyone looking from the outside, seemed full of love and quiet joy. But life has a way of throwing curveballs you never see coming. This whole ordeal reminded me that infidelity isn't something confined to the young. Sometimes heartbreak finds its way into lives that have already weathered decades together. Before all this, my parents had spent more than 3 decades side by side, weathering storms and sharing laughter. But then, everything started to shift, slowly at first, almost so subtly that it was easy to dismiss. It all started with a woman named Josephine. Of course, that's not her real name, but it'll do for this story. Josephine was 64, divorced, and to put it bluntly, led a lifestyle that couldn't have been more different from my mother's. She was loud, brash, and lived for parties, the kind of woman who drank too much and laughed too loudly, the kind who always seemed to invite drama wherever she went. From the moment I met Josephine, something about her rubbed me the wrong way. There was this indescribable quality, a sort of reckless energy that didn't sit well with me. So when my mom started getting close to her, really close, I felt that cold, uneasy knot form in my gut. It was so unlike Mom. She was never the type for wild nights or noisy bars. Sure, she enjoyed the occasional get-together, but she was always the responsible one, the steady hand. Now all of a sudden she was going out more often, drinking more freely, acting like a different version of herself. It was a giant, blaring alarm in my mind, and yet part of me didn't want to believe it. One evening, while Dad and Jenny's husband, Jenny being another neighbor, stayed behind to work on their cars, Mom, Josephine, and Jenny decided to head out on the boat for a little evening cruise. It seemed innocent enough. They set off around 6:30 p.m., promising to be back no later than 9. Meanwhile, back at home, Dad and Jenny's husband finished their repairs early and settled in for a quiet evening, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing out on the water. Mom didn't come home until much later. When she did, she found Dad waiting up for her, his expression tired and weighed down with worry. He didn't say much that night. He told her firmly that they would talk in the morning, that they both needed rest and a clear head to sort through whatever had happened. But sleep didn't come easily for Mom. All through the long, restless hours, she kept slipping to the bedroom door, peeking in, wanting desperately to talk to him, to confess, to find some way to undo the growing distance. Each time, Dad gently asked her to get some sleep, promising that they'd deal with everything once morning came. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her. By the time dawn broke, the full weight of what had happened came crashing down. Word had gotten out. Jenny's husband had found out about her infidelity, and wasted no time kicking her out of the house. Jenny ended up moving in temporarily with Josephine, clinging to her reckless friend now that her own life was in shambles. That morning, after talking privately with Mom, Dad sat my brother and me down to tell us the bitter truth. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, not anger, not even sadness exactly, but a deep, heavy hurt that you can't put into words. At first, I didn't know what to say. None of us did. At first, when Dad sat us down and told us what had happened, we just stared at him, stunned. It felt like a sick joke, like any second someone was going to jump out and yell, "Gotcha," and everything would go back to normal. But the seriousness in my father's voice, the deep, quiet pain in his eyes, told us the truth. And when it hit hard. The emotions overwhelmed me, and before I even realized it, I was crying. Not just for what had happened, but for the deep loss I knew we were all feeling, the loss of something we thought was unbreakable. Since that awful day, Mom's been fighting her own battles filled with guilt, shame, and a heavy sense of responsibility for what she'd done. For anyone facing something like this, I can say from experience, it helps to seek advice from someone outside the family. A counselor, a trusted friend, a professional who can give honest, objective support. Because when you're right in the middle of it, it's hard to see clearly through the pain. Yesterday, Mom made a trip out to St. George, Utah, a quiet spot tucked away in the Southwest, hoping she could find Dad or at least talk to him. She's still holding on to hope even now. We didn't want her to go through this alone. After a lot of convincing, we got her to move into our home temporarily. I promised her that we'd keep her updated on any news from Dad. Every day, my family made sure to visit her, sit with her, talk to her, remind her she wasn't alone. But strangely enough, the constant attention, though well-meaning, seemed to make her even more withdrawn. The guilt weighed on her, and the more we tried to cushion her, the more she sank into herself. Eventually, Mom decided to move into a modest little apartment just a few streets over. It's nothing like the life she used to have. Nothing like the big, beautiful riverfront house in Arizona where she and Dad spent so many happy summers riding boats, jet skis, and taking off on road trips with their camper, exploring coastlines and mountains across the country. Now she lives in a quiet, small space, working hard to rebuild some kind of life from the ashes. Physically, she's holding up okay. Back in a cozy environment, she's at least eating right and getting sleep. Emotionally, though, that's a different story. Mom's been on medication to manage the anxiety and depression. She tries to stay busy, writing, calling family members, sometimes telling the same stories over and over, almost like she's trying to make sense of it herself. I'm proud of her, in a way, even through the heartbreak. It took real courage for her to confess the truth to Dad, even knowing what it would cost her. It's a small comfort to know that, despite everything, she didn't pass any illness on to him, something that could have turned this tragedy into a catastrophe. Still, she hopes, prays, that Dad might forgive her one day. But deep down, I think we both know he's already made his decision. And as hard as it is to accept, I can't blame him. Some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal. These days, Mom's thrown herself into her new job. She's doing well too. Her bosses have praised her for her work ethic, for the quiet way she takes care of every task without complaint. If luck's on her side, maybe the job will help her find a little purpose again. But no matter how many steps forward she takes, the reality is hard and heavy. She's lost a lot. The life she once knew is gone. And no matter how much she wishes she could turn back time, some mistakes can't be undone.